Borderlands has grown and changed, I think, very much over, we could say, half a century. And that's an also interesting difference between North American and even Mexican, and then more fully Latin American historiography. Borderlands was associated, going back to the about second third of the 20th century, Borderlands was associated with Herbert Eugene Bolton and this whole kind of school of the rim of Christendom, and the idea of the borderlands that encompassed southwestern United States and northern Mexico. And to be fair, what Bolton and his students did was bring the Spanish component, as they saw it, the Spanish component of United States history into the historiography. And as actually one of your colleagues said, looking east from the west. And that was very important. Also, Bolton and his colleagues did a lot to help organize archives, and they brought to the attention of American scholars, there's this whole wealth of archives in Mexico to which you need to go. It was, however, strongly institutional history, strongly Hispanic history, with a lot of information, but not a lot of information about indigenous peoples, but not an anthropological orientation toward indigenous peoples. And the term borderlands, which translates with difficulty into Spanish, in both Spanish and Portuguese, we tend to use frontera or frontera, didn't have the same connotation, and the whole Frederick Jackson Turner notion of frontier as sort of opening up democratic institutions was looked at by Latin American historians and largely discarded. That for them, the frontiers were places of violence, from what they saw from their own histories, places of violence, places of kind of openness and porousness, but not one of an opening of democratic institutions. And from the North American side, I will say that one of the scholars who so contributed in a very important way to reorienting and re-enlivening the concept of borderlands was the late David J. Weber. And I'm very grateful to have known him, to have been his friend. We've known each other since the 1970s, and I was a fellow at the Clements Center at Southern Methodist University really during the last year before his illness. And he actually asked prominent Mexican historians like Silvio Zavala, what does borderlands mean to you? Why isn't this important in your, in your scholarship? And they answered, part of it was that for Mexicans concentrated in central Mexico and southern Mexico, the north was always kind of foreign. And until quite recently, and here your delimitation of the last 2 decades is really important, Mexican historians had kind of not taken into account the areas of Mexico that they lost to the United States as being a continuous part of Mexican social and cultural history. And this now is changing. I was involved in, not in organizing, but I was involved in 2, again, collective publications coming out of symposia that dealt precisely with that, with the independence movements and with the participation of indigenous peoples in the areas that later on passed to the United States. But also is that conceptually it just didn't make sense as part of their history. But I have been very much influenced by this, and I just finished one of the big projects I was involved in over the last 3 to 4 years, is a handbook for the Oxford Handbook series entitled Borderlands of the Iberian World. And my co-editor is a historian in Mexico, Dana Levin Rojo, and we brought together 40 authors to produce 34 chapters on both North America and South America, and as much as we could to cover the networks, the maritime networks, that linked the Americas of the Iberian world to Africa and to Asia. So we took a much more expansive view of borderlands as areas of cultural commingling, of not simply limits or frontiers in that sense, but as very porous areas in which cultural and social change occurred. And then also looking at this intimate aspect of borderlands through gender. We included also science, the production of knowledge in and about the borderlands, as well as art and music. So it was an exciting project, a very exacting project, but it's one that I truly believe is going to help establish a kind of benchmark for continuing work in Borderlands from here on forward.